Hello everybody! In today's Mustard Tree Creative session we're going to make some collages inspired by the work of Henri Matisse. Matisse was primarily a painter, but later in life lost a lot of mobility due to illness. Instead of letting this stop him from making art, he started to express his creativity through a new technique he developed which he called drawing with scissors. If you want to have a go at drawing with scissors, you'll need paper, paint, paintbrushes, scissors, glue, and something to take inspiration from. I'm going to be using these plants. The first step is to paint your paper. If you don't have any paint or enough time or patience for this step, then you could always just use coloured paper. Colour was really important to Matisse, so I'd encourage you to have a careful think about the colours that you're using. Maybe refrain from using paint straight out of the tube and have a play around with mixing your own shades, like I've got in my jars here. I'm not worrying about painting a perfect flat colour. I think some of the charm in Matisse's work is the texture that you can see in his shapes, so I'll be happy if you can see some brush strokes in my final piece. After you've painted a few sheets, at least 3, this is where the patience comes in. Set them aside to dry. It's important that these are fully dry before the next stage so that they don't tear while you're cutting your shapes. Here we are a few hours later and everything's dry. The next step is to take a good look at your objects and try to identify and isolate all of the different shapes that make it up. I'm going to begin cutting these shapes out of my paper. You might have noticed that I'm not using a pencil to draw out my shapes before cutting. I think it's important in this project to work loosely and expressively, and that means letting go of any perfectionist impulses. I know that can be hard. I'm making sure to cut out the shapes as they appear to me rather than how I know them to look. What I mean by this is, although I know that all of the leaves on this top plant are pretty much round, I'm looking at them at an angle which makes some of them appear a lot thinner or more oblong. I just find that this makes for a much more interesting collage, as well as helping you practice your observational skills. Once I've got a pile of colourful shapes, I'm ready to start assembling them onto a background. You could choose to construct a likeness of your object using your shapes, but actually what I'm going to do is use my shapes to make a whole new composition. I obviously opted for doing 2 separate pictures, one for each of my plants, but don't feel obliged to just do 1 picture per object. You might have looked at a whole horde of objects to give you inspiration for shapes to cut out, and they might work really nicely all together in one collage. As always, this activity is completely open to your interpretation and adaptations based on what you feel happiest with. There's no correct way to design an abstract composition like this. Just have a play around and see what feels right to you. Remember to pay attention to the spaces you're leaving between the shapes as well as the placement of the shapes themselves. I was pretty satisfied with my compositions at this stage, so I just went in with my Pritt stick and started securing my artwork down in place. The final step was to neaten it up and make it look more finished by trimming down the edges until I got rid of all of the unpainted paper. Then I went ahead and repeated the stages on the second collage. And here's the final result. Do let me know if you tried this drawing with scissors collage activity at home. I'd love to see how yours turned out.